Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Peace of Mind at Health Assured. I'm Sofia, one of the lead counsellors, and today our topic is about the importance of mental health awareness. We all know that talking about mental health is important, but I think it's something that is still, unfortunately, not always easy to talk about. So we're really going to be diving into the importance of it, why it's beneficial for your life, and of course looking at things for you to gain more awareness in your life and how you can be more in touch with your mental health. I think if you understand all of these different factors, you're going to really start to make some great progress with your mental health. So to go further into this with me today, I'm here with Brittany Chambers. Brittany is another one of our lead counsellors. So Brittany, do you just want to start by telling us a bit about yourself, a bit about your background as a counsellor, and maybe about what made you want to come and talk about this topic today?
Yeah, so I qualified in person-centred and psychotherapy back in June of 2023, and then I did my placement with Mind, and I stayed working with Mind. I actually moved into a role of a wellbeing worker at night, so band 3 support worker under the NHS, but I worked with Mind. We ran a facility called Safe Haven, which was where people with complex mental health who struggled at night, were in crisis, and they would come to us. They would sit down and talk to us face to face. Sometimes it'd be over the phone, and it depended on the time of the night for some people.
Yeah.
We'd work very closely with mental health practitioners, nurses, and in A&E, and sometimes went to the wards to support as well. And then I eventually moved into my role at Health Assured as a graduate counsellor, passed my probation there, and then moved into the wellbeing referral team, worked there, and now I've moved on to obviously working as a grad lead.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so I've worked in mental health in various settings, worked with mental health in various complexities, and I think because I've seen the different dynamics of where mental health can fall and how it can affect people in different ways, depending on what's going on for them at the time, I think it just really is quite, I think that invokes a passion for me to speak about mental health and raise that awareness that it isn't just a one size fits all, and that there's so much depth to it for people.
Definitely, and it's so good that you've worked with such a wide range of different people from different backgrounds, and like you said, it sort of opens your mind to just how complex mental health is and how it's different for everyone, and it differs for everyone. Everyone's going through their own different things, and I think it also shows as well how different things work for different individuals. Yeah,
I definitely agree. Certain individuals, for example, with complex mental health, need something different than somebody who has work-related stress. Perhaps just dependent on what they're presented with, someone in crisis would need different support to what someone who may not be experiencing suicidal thoughts needs. So I think it just shows there that it, like I said, that it isn't that one size fits all, that it does need those different approaches. And I think what makes it hard for people to not know how to approach it is because sometimes there isn't enough awareness. There might be a taboo, there might be a stigma around mental health, and it just makes it quite difficult for people to either access support or know what to do, when it comes to gaining support for themselves.
Exactly, and I think you made such an important point there, Brittany, just about particularly when you talked about the stigma and about some of the reasons why people really struggle to reach out for support. And I guess in your experience with working with people, have you noticed, unfortunately, still there to be a lot of stigma around mental health, how people view it?
Yeah, definitely. I find it a lot when in particular cultures, men in particular can find it quite difficult to be open. I think there's that that misconception that men should be stoic, men shouldn't be emotional, boys don't cry. I think it's hard, isn't it, because it feels like it's something that just occurs through generation. And I think that's where again, it feeds in generations. Is quite a big one, where you'll have somebody who is maybe, you know, a part of a younger generation who is quite open to receiving support, because that just feels like the norm nowadays, to reach out for support when you are struggling. Whereas if you spoke to somebody of an older generation, they could find it very difficult, and, you know, you could be the first person that they've ever spoken to about, you know, the issues that they've gone through in their life. So I do find that working in different roles that I've worked in, that stigma is always there, just in different areas.
Exactly, it doesn't discriminate, and like you were saying, it's apparent in men and sometimes in older generations. They didn't have the mental health awareness that we or the younger generation have now, so it's difficult for them to open up. Like you're saying, it can be cultural issues. I think as well, sometimes people that have had negative experiences about opening up about their mental health, maybe they talked to someone about their mental health before and it wasn't received well. That can be really disheartening, you know, to be vulnerable in front of someone and then it's not welcomed or you don't feel appreciated by it. That can definitely stop you from having that conversation again. It can cause you to isolate yourself.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's something that I found commonly when I worked under the hospital. That was a common conception that came in, that, well, you know, if they were regular usage of you know, they use a service quite regularly, it'd be, oh, you're here again, you know, like, what's going on for you this time? And it wouldn't come from a place of care. Sometimes for some people it'd feel like, you know, they don't care about me, and then that just makes them feel a lot more lower, a lot more isolated and alone.
Yeah, because even the way that you said it kind of struck me in a way that they were saying it not with much empathy and also a bit of judgment, that you're here again. There's a negative connotation that comes from it, and I think that can make someone feel like there's something wrong with me, and they can attach themselves more to the mental illness. Because I was thinking before as well, when it comes to mental illness, I think, and stigma in that way as well, sometimes people can really attach themselves to a specific mental illness. So rather than saying something, for example, like, you know, I'm struggling with anxiety, they're like, I am an anxious person. Or if they're struggling with bipolar or schizophrenic, they're like, you know, rather than saying, you know, I'm struggling at the moment with this, they'll attach themselves to that mental illness. And do you think that could be quite a damaging thing to do, to attach yourself to it?
I think it can, but I feel like some people do find that knowing what's wrong can make them understand that actually there's nothing wrong with them. This is just who they are. This is how their brain works. I think it depends what side you look at it and what side a person perceives that label as. So, you know, people may perceive, you know, say, for example, anxiety, say, I am an anxious person. That is the way I'll always be. And they see it as quite a negative thing, where it's like, this kind of overtakes who I am, and it makes it feel like that, you know, anxiety rules their life, rather than thinking, this is an emotion that I know I don't have control over at times, and I know I can struggle with this, and look at the other things that come in. They can kind of let it rule their life and take control of them. Whereas, say, for example, someone who, say, even with anxiety again, they could say, like, I have anxiety, and that helps me understand that these are the emotions that I do feel, and there's nothing wrong with that. So I think there's that perception of, it gives them an understanding of what's going on for them, but also there is also that label that people can kind of make it a part of their identity, where it's a negative perception, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think you summarised it really perfectly there. It's about how you view your anxiety. Either it can be your biggest enemy, or it can be something that you acknowledge. And I think when you acknowledge it, it can give people comfort, because they can say, you know, I sort of understand why I feel that way. Oh, I didn't realise that was anxiety. But it's about how you're telling yourself it. So not going too far almost and saying, yeah, this is controlling me, because then it will start to control you. Yeah. And, following from that as well, I also looked at some research from Mind, and they quoted that 51% of the UK population believes that there's been a great deal of shame associated with mental health. So I think that was a really interesting stat, because I was like, obviously, a lot of people are actually aware that the stigma around mental health is there. However, what was quite interesting to read after that was that 50% of the UK population stated that when they experience mental health difficulties, they still feel ashamed for it. So it seems like half the population knows that there's stigma, yet more than half the population still feels that shame. Yeah. What would you say are some ways that we can start to break down that stigma? Because we know how much it can impact someone.
Yeah, I think the main thing that I would always think about or look at recommending is being open, being very transparent, being honest with your emotions, having normal conversations. Yeah. I think there is that perceived difficulty that, oh no, we can't talk about this. Like, for example, suicide, it's a common topic that people feel very uncomfortable to ask people around, or are you having suicidal thoughts, or to say, just have that normal conversation with somebody. I think it just induces that fear factor for someone, but then that also increases people to feel shameful for the way that they feel and what they're experiencing. So I think having an open, honest, transparent conversation that is normal, where there isn't that judgment, saying this is a safe space and nothing you say to me is going to shock me. It's not going to induce any judgment. This is just me and you talking. I think that would hopefully dissipate any shame or stigma around conversations, not just around suicide, but any mental health issue or topic. I think a safe space is one thing that you really do need to provide, where you can build that trust with somebody. Because if somebody doesn't trust you, if they don't feel safe, they're not going to share their experiences, they're going to withdraw. Exactly. So you just need to make sure the environment and the conversation that you're having are those things that I've mentioned there. And it's just two people talking, essentially,
Exactly. And it's when you're having that conversation, it's making that person feel like there's nothing wrong with how you feel. Because it's particularly with suicide, a lot of the times people struggling with suicidal thoughts don't reach out, and that worsens and that increases the likelihood of them actually acting on those thoughts, because they're not reaching out. It stops them from getting the support that they need. It's actually a really good, the last study from Japan, I think Japan has one of the highest suicide rates for men in the world, and they found that 50 to 59-year-old age groups, they have the highest suicide rate in Japan, 23.4 suicides per 100,000 people, which is such an incredibly high number. And in Japanese culture, it's very common to not talk about your mental health at all. It's very stigmatized in, I guess we were saying before, in certain cultures it is. And it's because there isn't that safe space for people to talk about it with. I guess in this country, we're more open then, but it's the importance of, you feel this way and it's okay. There's no shame in it, because you can't help how you feel. So we need to look more at accepting how someone feels rather than having judgments towards them about it.
I think, I totally agree. I think that statistic there is a quite sad statistic. But again, I think, as you said there, it just shows how in certain cultures, it really does have an impact on people's mental health, where there's not that openness. Mental health isn't a conversation that we have in certain cultures, just because people may believe it doesn't exist. People may think that it's not something you talk about, and it's just a very, very sad statistic to think about. And then obviously you compare it to the UK, I think people are a lot more open in the UK, but there's definitely more that we can do as a society to support people.
Definitely. And it's sort of like you said then, it's just about trying to be as open as you can. And I think a big part of it as well is to try and challenge a bit more certain stereotypes that you might have, because I think a big part of stereotypes come from the media at times. I know we were talking a bit before, but, are there more complex mental health issues? Like, I know that you've worked closely with these as well, Brittany, but like schizophrenia, borderline personality disorder, the media portrays these types of illness in one type of way, and it's normally a violent, it's a negative type of way. But with mental health, in general, it's always a spectrum, just because even with neurodiversity, if you have autism or you have ADHD, there's a spectrum to it. It's not one size fits all, as you said then, as you said at the very start. And I think that when people see these stereotypes, I think not even just in the media, but sometimes movie depictions, I think they are starting to be a lot more open now, but we see these things, and because we've grown up with these beliefs, we don't always challenge them. So I think it's really important to try and challenge them a bit more and to say, you know what, maybe there's an alternative. Maybe it's not always like this, or what would it feel like to think about something like this from a different perspective and from the opposite perspective?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that, like schizophrenia, for example, I think there's that common misconception that these people are violent, these people are, bad people in society. And I think it doesn't help with movie depictions, false narratives, false representations. That is not the case.
It's just not the case, is it? It's just not true.
Not at all. You'll find people with schizophrenia, they may have manic episodes where they are more hyper in a way where they might not sleep. They might notice like an increased sex drive, for example, but they can still have depressive episodes, like really low episodes that can lean in towards, suicidal ideation, feeling very alone. I think all mental health out there is depicted in a certain way. And I think we take those stereotypes along with us and they just get put out into society, and then that induces that shame as well. And as a society, I think we really need to improve in a way where we can acknowledge that, like this can be sensationalized, this can be glamorized in a way. But this does not define everyone who suffers from schizophrenia or everyone who is depressed. Depression looks very different for different people. It's not just the case of sitting in a dark room, not talking to anybody and losing all your basic self-care needs. People can still go to work, they can still function, but they can go home and, really struggle with, low mood, whether it be, noticing that they're not eating as much, not really engaging with friends, but they are still functioning other parts of their lives. So I think that's where as a society we really do need to improve and not take a movie depiction or what the media presents as gospel, because it's not.
We can't tunnel vision on one image of mental health and apply that to the entire population, because it looks different for everyone. One size doesn't fit all. And I think a big part of reducing stigma is just to have those open conversations, be non-judgmental, and go into conversations with sort of an open heart and say, no matter what you say right now, there's no judgment. And I think on the flip side, when it comes to sort of just mental health awareness, I think, you can understand how important it is, but it's also important for you to actually increase your self-awareness and to actually understand ways to be more in touch with your mental health as well. And I guess, Brittany, like, what would you say are like some good ways that you've noticed working with your clients, of ways that they can, I guess, if someone is just starting their journey and they're like, I feel like I don't understand myself, I don't actually understand my mental health, where would you say would be like a good place for them to start?
I think there's quite a few different places that they can start off. One is looking at reputable websites. So Mind is one that I would commonly advise on, just because they do have such a good website where it's factual information. I am quite cautious that if we say to people, Google your symptoms, they do that and they find out that they
take you anywhere.
Take you down a rabbit hole. So Mind is a really good one that I would advise, if you're feeling anxious and you want to know a bit more about it, have a look on there. There's, you know, and it talks you through like support, coping mechanisms, how friends and family can support as well. So looking at a different perspective. But if we're looking at mechanisms that we should be doing for ourselves, one that I would really encourage is journaling. Journaling is one that can come in many different forms. So just to kind of understand like your feelings, to be a bit more in tune with yourself, like to understand like what your experiences are and your emotions and like any behaviours you might notice that are out of the ordinary, writing them down, just having a space where you can write them down about like, these are the behaviours I've noticed on these particular days around these circumstances. And we might notice that it's a bit of a pattern perhaps. So for anxiety, we might notice that we might feel a bit more anxious on the way to work. We might notice that we feel relieved when we go home from work. And when we're at work, we might notice our heart rate fasten. We might notice that we don't have breaks where we're starting to feel very stressed, might get a bit more irritable, but then we have that relief when we go home and maybe the dread the next day. By tracking it through a journal, you can really understand, this is where my trigger is, these are the behaviours and the, you know, the emotions that are coming up for me, including your thoughts in there as well. What's coming up for you in your mind. And it just helps you feel a bit more in tune to know what's going on for you, but then to think, okay, I know the pattern that's happening. What can I do going forward to support myself? How can I reach out for support? You know, if I want to know more information, things like mind, you know, so I think that could be a good way at gaining a bit more of insight in terms of your circumstances and how you're feeling, behaviours, thought process, things like that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think journaling can be such a good step for a lot of people because, you know, no one else is judging you. It's just you and sort of that pen and paper talking to someone feels like too much in the moment. And like you said, the more, I think it's really important to be consistent with it because it's important that you consistently track those patterns and those behaviours. And it's like you were saying then, when you noticed, like, for example, if you've been keeping a consistent pattern about the times where you've noticed, you start to feel maybe sad, or you start to feel, oh, you know, I felt really anxious in that moment. I'm going to write down exactly what I was doing, exactly what I was thinking. And then you start to look at those patterns and you're like, okay, I noticed that I feel anxious. And a lot of the time it's after I've spoken to my mum. It's after I've gone into that one-to-one with my manager, whatever those things are. And then you start to identify with that first trigger. And I think that's a really good foundation because once you understand that, once you have that self-awareness, that's when you can start to make the next step. Because I think self-awareness is sort of the foundation for a lot of things. You know, a lot of people feel anxious, but they don't know what they feel anxious about. And then if you don't know what that is, how do you even start that journey in healing that?
I agree. I think self-reflection is a crucial step, and self-awareness is a crucial step. So they kind of go hand in hand together. So you're building your self-awareness through your journaling, but what you do after you journal to be able to see what's going on, which you noted there, is like that self-reflection. So thinking about, actually, I get why I feel that way because I understand what the circumstances around that. And then we can look at planning on what we need to do to be able to go forward. So reaching out for support. You know, there's, and I think journaling is just a really good foundation, like you said there.
Exactly. And just quickly as well, I liked the point that you said then about journaling different emotions. You know, you don't just have to pull out your journal every time that you feel sad. Sometimes when I feel really happy, I'll literally just write that down. Or if I feel a sense of happiness, and then I can always look at those things. So the moments where I do feel sad, I sort of have a list of instant serotonin boosters, things that make me happy. And I also think as well, it can be good for you to understand what's important to you. You know, let's say you felt happy. You wrote down what you were doing in that moment. You're like, oh, I felt happy because I was helping someone. And that made me feel sort of some sort of fulfillment. And then you might acknowledge that as a value of yours. This is something that means a lot to me. And that can be really helpful in understanding yourself more. I think when you understand your thoughts, your behaviours, the things that keep you going, it can help you to create a whole picture of who you are.
Yeah, and I like what you mentioned there about bringing the happiness, the good emotions that do come in, like the gratitude, because it doesn't all have to be doom and gloom when you're looking at these coping mechanisms. It doesn't have to be focused on the bad things that happen in your day, because that can lead to that tunnel vision of or my days are all just bad. But when we look at the good things that are happening, like, you know, those moments where we do feel happy, we might feel grateful, we might have experienced laughter that day where we hadn't the day before. And those moments are the moments that we should really, really cherish, especially when we're in such a place where we do feel low, when we are struggling. Because when, like I said, when we're on those bad days, we tunnel vision. And by doing the journaling, by increasing like the notice of the happier, the positive side of things, what we're doing is saying, actually, you know, this day it wasn't my worst day. It was an okay day. It wasn't my best day, but I'll settle for an okay day because I've seen there's these things there for me. And I think that really does showcase somebody that self-reflection.
Yeah, exactly. And when we always remember the negative parts of the day rather than the positives. And I think if you take the time to actually reflect on the good things that happened in the day as well, you literally start to form different habit patterns of actually seeking those things out more in your day rather than the negative things. I think what can also be helpful just in terms of building awareness is, I know that we've talked about it a few times, but I think mindfulness can be incredibly helpful. You know, mindfulness can connect you into being in a higher place. I think it's something that people won't always try because they think, oh, I can't do it. But it doesn't just have to be in terms of meditation. It can also be going for walks, doing a hobby that makes you feel, anything that keeps you grounded and in the present moment can be a form of it.
Yeah.
So I think that can also be a helpful way.
Yeah, definitely. Because meditation, you'll find, again, like, I think this is something that we'll say commonly. That is podcast, one size doesn't fit all. And it's all trial and error when it comes to mental health. We're not going to hit the jackpot when we first start trying things out. If we do, amazing. But it's quite a few far between.
You're probably not.
Yeah. I think that's where, like, it comes with that trial and error. We do need to try different things. I know it can feel demotivating when we do try something that doesn't work, but meditation, it can be hard for some people to get into just because we have to be ultimately relaxed, and sometimes we are not in a space to do that. So I think that's where engaging in your hobbies, you know, the things that, you know, can boost your mood, going for walks, exercise. It might just be changing up your diet to be, you know, a bit more healthier, you know, looking at your sleep hygiene to, you know, increase your sleep quality to help uplift your mood. It could be absolutely anything that you're trying your best to help improve your mental health. And because I think there is that, you know, when you say mindfulness, everyone's like, oh, it's meditation, I can't do that. But it's not just meditation. It is a wide range of things, and it is all about trial and error.
Exactly. And it's kind of like we said, Berwin, if you're sort of getting into that habit of becoming more self-aware, the moments where you do feel sad, you can ask yourself, well, what helps me when I feel this way? And then you'll be able to exactly identify the things that do help. But then if you're just starting that journey, just start by trying different things out and noticing that, you know, I felt a lot better after doing that. Doing that really helped my mind really helped me take my mind off that negative thing that just happened. I feel a lot better right now. So it's about, I always think about having a toolbox of things, almost like a self-care box of things that you can go to for when you're struggling. And I think inherently out of it all, if this is something that you are struggling with and talking about your mental health, I think therapy can be a really good start for people. If not therapy, then just talking to your GP, talking to someone that you trust, just to talk about it and just to be open. And I think even if you are struggling with it, it's okay to sort of be honest about that and say, you know, I'm struggling at the moment and I'm finding it hard to talk about. Yeah,
definitely. And I think therapy is a really good option. There's loads of different ones out there for different needs and for different focuses, different things that you're hoping to gain. Again, not one size fits all when it comes to therapy. You know? So I think it's a good stepping stone for people to kind of understand maybe the underlying emotions. Why do they feel the way they do? How can they go forward? What's going to work for me while I feel like this? Is it a space to just talk about what you've been going through? You know, like I said, lots of different methods for lots of different reasons. And if you don't feel that, you know, counselling or therapy is for you for right now, it's okay. Like, you've got other options. Speak to people that you trust, people that you care about. Like I said, the GP. There's lots of different resources out there. But I do think those resources can be improved in ways. I do think there is that. I think there's like a lack of support in certain areas.
Yeah, unfortunately, there still is, isn't there?
Yeah.
And, you know, it's just sort of the current state of mental health services at the moment. And even though they can be improved, I think it's just about finding what works for you right now. Yeah, you know, I guess coming a bit more away from the things that you can do, like in terms of like motivating factors, what sort of things have you noticed from your clients when they've been more open, or when you've seen someone be more open with you on that journey? What do some of those changes might look like for the individual?
Yeah, so it could look like as simple as somebody smiling a bit more. Someone might have started to, you know, get out of their pajamas. They might have, you know, whether they do their hair up, whether they put makeup on, whether they just get, you know, want to get dressed and present a bit better, because they're feeling good about themselves. And also they're engaging in support, whether it be around them, they're taking on board the things that are being spoken about in therapy sessions. So if it is coping mechanisms, they're creating habits with those outside of the sessions, putting them into daily practice. So it shows there that their motivation is building. There are changes happening. Change is very individualistic. But like I said, so, you know, it could be the changes in appearance, you know, starting to feel better about themselves, look a bit better. It could be putting things into daily practice. But I think that happens once you start to build that relationship in therapy with the client. So by, you know, it's not going to happen on session one. But like throughout the sessions, you'll notice that the trust is being built, you know, by the counsellor offering that safe space where there's no judgment, allowing them to share what they need to share, giving them that non-biased perspective as well, and a non-advice perspective, because I find people feel their perception is taken away, or their experience is taken away, you know, with family and friends, when they go, oh, I've experienced that as well, and they focus on theirs. So I think with the way the counselling works, it helps build that trust and that relationship up. So then once the client trusts you and they feel it's safe, they'll open up more, and that'll change their presentation as they go through the sessions, because they do feel like it is that open and safe space to talk about what's going on for them. But also because there's that trust there, they're putting their trust of, you know, their mental health experiences in the counsellor to say, okay, like, you know, I hear you, and this is what we need to do going forward to support. And because that trust is developed and they know that you're coming from a place where you're looking within their experience, they'll take on the things that you're recommending. So like I said, the coping mechanisms, they'll do them into daily practice. So for example, if it's a gratitude journal, you might notice that their mood uplifts because they're looking at, you know, the positive things that happen in the day rather than just the negative. Or if they have been in a place where they have been so severely depressed, but they're starting to, you know, have a shower, they're starting to brush their teeth. It's all about those little small wins where it shows that they're taking what they're getting from that therapy away to be able to make those changes that may feel really, really big for them. And it helps gear them to go forward to feel better.
Exactly, yeah. And it starts from trust in the relationship. And not only do they start to trust the counsellor and the space more in the sessions, but they also start to trust themselves more, because they're coming with these vulnerable emotions that they probably never shared. And if you're in the right sort of environment and the right relationship, you start to trust these emotions more, and you start to say, you know, I always think as well, when you start to be more open and honest with yourself, it's a weight that's being lifted off you, because you're not having to carry that mask anymore. And I think even in the ways that you've noticed that someone smiles a bit more, they start to notice those little positive changes that they're installing in their habit. It's because they start to feel more at peace with themselves, because they're not carrying that burden. They're not carrying that weight anymore. And therapy can be the place for someone to start to trust these emotions more, and to actually be vulnerable. And, you know, the second you stop running away from whatever it is the hell you're running away from, and you turn around and you confront it, you start to build resilience towards that feeling as well. You start to say, you know what, I've done that now, and because I did it in the right environment with the right person. It doesn't even have to be a therapist, family, friend, whatever. Maybe you validated it yourself. You just accept how you feel. That's when the real progress starts. You start to develop that inner peace.
Definitely. And I think, because I like what you mentioned there about letting those burdens go. I think there's that common saying you'll hear is, I'm burdening other people.
Yeah.
And I think that's where therapy is helpful. I'd like to hope they wouldn't feel like they're burdening a therapist or a counsellor. Of course, you can feel that way. It's valid to feel that way. But, they're not, because we're looking at their experiences. So like I said, with that conversation, family and friends, it can feel like your experience is taken away sometimes. So I can feel like you'll be burdening them. They've got their own problems. They don't want to hear mine. So therapy is a good way at diminishing that kind of conversation and topic as well, and that feeling.
Yeah, I find it quite funny when people come to me and they say, oh, but people have it worse though. Oh, I'm just I'm just rambling on. But I'm like, this is for you.
Yeah.
Like this hour is for you to talk about whatever you want to talk about. And obviously when you talk to family and friends about it, they're not trained to be a therapist, or they're not your client in that moment. So they might just revert it back to themselves. But if you want the space to process it, I always think it's good to have a support network, but it's also important. Therapy is also there for a reason. If you need that specific support, the place to, I suppose, offload, burden someone, I say quotation marks, burden someone with how you feel. Yeah. This is a really good conversation. I hope that people who are listening to it feel less scared or have less fear about reaching out for support, and that, you've taken some ways to, have a better peace of mind. So thanks so much, Brittany, for coming on today.